90 cubic meters of broken rock, shoved in a single pass by a blade wider than a two-lane road. That machine is waiting at the end of this list. We start with a 40-ton workhorse every construction crew already recognizes on site, then climb through Caterpillar and Komatsu's largest iron until we reach the 152-ton Komatsu D575A, the biggest production bulldozer ever built. The Caterpillar D8 name has been on job sites since 1935, and the D8T is the current version of a machine that more or less defined what a bulldozer looks like to the general public. It sits at the small end of Caterpillar's heavy dozer range, but small only means something once you know what comes later on this list. Crews reach for the D8T when a site needs serious grading power without the footprint of a mining machine parked next to it. The D8T carries an operating weight of 87,083 pounds, close to 39.5 tons, roughly what 10 adult African elephants would weigh standing on one machine. Power comes from a Caterpillar C15 engine, rated around 310 horsepower, enough to keep the blade moving through packed clay without stalling against harder ground. Its semi-U blade holds more than 6 cubic yards of material per pass, which is why road builders and site prep crews run this machine for 10 and 12-hour shifts without swapping it out. Cat has kept the D8 lineage in continuous production for close to 9 decades, updating the engine and electronics while leaving the basic formula alone, because contractors already trusted it. During the post-war building boom, D8s cut highway grades through terrain nobody wanted to touch by hand, and that reputation is still doing the selling today. End to end, the D8T runs a little under 9 meters, about the length of 2 mid-sized delivery trucks parked nose to tail. At the cab roof, it stands roughly 3 1/3 meters, taller than a standard shipping container turned on end. It is the smallest machine on this list, and every other dozer here outweighs it by at least 10 tons. Look at the semi-U blade bolted across the front of the D8T. Its curved wings keep loose material from spilling around the edges mid-push, letting the machine carry more per pass than a flat blade of the same width would manage. That curve is the silhouette that makes a cat dozer recognizable from 100 meters away, on any continent. The D8T runs out of blade capacity long before a mine face runs out of rock to move. Caterpillar's answer is one size up, the D9T, the dozer most people picture when they picture Cat's military-grade machine, because an armored version of this exact platform, the D9R, has served with Israeli combat engineers for exactly that kind of heavy clearing work. The civilian D9T does the same pushing job without the armor plate, handling overburden on mine benches too large for a D8. The D9T carries an operating weight of 106,618 pounds, 48.5 tons, close to the load of 30 adult African elephants. Under the hood sits a Caterpillar C18 ACERT engine, a step up in displacement from the D8T's C15, built to keep pushing when the blade meets rock that would stall the smaller machine. The extra weight matters almost as much as the extra horsepower, because a dozer's pushing force comes largely from how much steel is bearing down through the tracks, not just what the engine claims on paper. The armored D9R derivative became known worldwide for clearing routes and demolishing structures in hostile terrain, a use case so far from a construction site that Caterpillar has never officially marketed it, yet it is the reason people outside the equipment industry know the D9 name at all. The D9T stretches close to 9.5 meters, about the length of a city bus. It stands roughly 3.5 meters at the cab, tall enough that an operator on the ground has to look up to see over the roofline. Next to the D8T, it looks like a different category of machine, and on a mine site, it is treated like one. One class above the D9T sits the D10T2, the point where Caterpillar's dozer lineup stops being about job sites and starts being about mines. Caterpillar introduced the original D10 in 1977 as its first dozer, built specifically for large-scale mining rather than construction, and the T2 is the current descendant of that idea. This is the size where oil sands operators in Alberta and coal operators in Australia start ordering these machines by the dozen. The D10T2 carries an operating weight of 154,700 pounds, just over 70 tons, close to the weight of 3 fully loaded semi-trucks stacked into one chassis. It runs on a Caterpillar C27A engine, a significant jump in displacement from the D9T's C18, needed because at this weight class the machine spends most of its life pushing overburden rather than grading roads. Oil sand sites in northern Alberta run D10s around the clock, through winters that drop past -40, which is part of why Caterpillar builds a cold weather package specifically for this model. A single D10T2 can replace 2 smaller dozers on an overburden stripping job, cutting the number of operators and maintenance cycles a mine has to manage. The D10T2 measures roughly 10.5 meters long, close to the length of a standard shipping container and a half. Standing at the cab, it reaches nearly 4 meters, tall enough that ground crews stay well clear of its blind spots while it works. It is the last machine on this list you could still plausibly see on a large highway project rather than strictly a mine. Fixed on the operator cab perched high above the D10T2's frame. Sealed and pressurized against open-pit dust, it is built to ROPS and FOPS standards, so the operator survives a rollover or falling debris from a high wall above. At this size, the cab is the only part of the dozer built around a person instead of a payload. Caterpillar is not the only company building dozers at this size. Komatsu's D375A-8 is the Japanese manufacturer's flagship large-frame production dozer. The machine mines and quarries reach for when they want Cat D10 class pushing power, but already run a Komatsu brand fleet. Komatsu has sold D375 series dozers since the early 1980s, and the current A8 model is the result of 4 decades of the same platform getting incrementally heavier and more powerful. The D375A-8 carries an operating weight of 72,900 kilograms, 72 9/10 tons, about as heavy as 48 average family sedans parked on top of each other. It's built around a large displacement Komatsu SAA6D170E engine, tuned for continuous heavy pushing rather than short bursts, the kind of duty cycle a quarry runs 18 hours a day. Quarry operators favor the D375A-8 specifically because Komatsu tunes its undercarriage for abrasive rock environments, where track life determines how often the whole fleet sits idle for maintenance instead of moving stone. Komatsu's global market share in mining dozers sits close enough to Caterpillar's that most large mines run both brands side by side rather than standardizing on one. The D375A-8 runs about 10.5 meters long, close to the D10T2 it directly competes against. It stands almost 4 meters tall at the cab roof, roughly the height of a 2-story building's first floor. 2 dozers this size, working opposite ends of the same bench, can clear a quarry face faster than either brand's marketing team likes to admit belongs to the other. Drop down to the undercarriage running beneath the D375A-8. Wide track shoes spread its full weight across a footprint far longer than any road vehicle could manage, keeping ground pressure low enough to cross soft quarry floor that would swallow a wheeled haul truck. Komatsu builds this undercarriage specifically abrasion-resistant, because on a quarry floor the tracks wear out long before the engine does. Between Komatsu's D375A and its true mining flagship sits a machine built for one specific fight: oil sands. The D455A-3 was engineered to sit in the gap Komatsu saw between its large-frame quarry dozer and its heaviest mining iron, a purpose-built oil sands and overburden machine rather than a stretched version of something else. Alberta's oil sands operations, where the material is heavy, sticky, and abrasive all at once, are where this specific model earns its keep. The D455A-3 carries an operating weight of 99,660 kilograms, close to 100 tons, roughly the mass of a fully loaded Boeing 737 sitting on tracks instead of wheels. Its engine produces 610 horsepower, tuned less for speed and more for sustained torque, against oil sands overburden that behaves more like wet cement than dry soil. Bitumen-bearing ground clogs blades and undercarriages differently than ordinary rock, which is why Komatsu shaped this model's undercarriage and blade geometry around shedding sticky material rather than just carrying more of it. Oil sand sites run these machines in shifts that rotate every few hours, specifically because the material is so abrasive that even a well-built undercarriage needs the brake. The D455A-3 stretches to roughly 11.5 meters, longer than a standard city bus with room to spare. It stands a little over 4 meters at the cab, tall enough that operators climb an integrated ladder rather than a single step to reach the door. It sits almost exactly between the D375A-8 below it and the D475A-5 above it, a machine built for a gap rather than a headline. The D455A-3 was purpose-built for oil sands, but even it runs out of blade long before the deepest coal and copper pits run out of overburden. Komatsu's D475A-5 sits one class above it, and one class below the single largest bulldozer in the world. This is the model most surface minds mean when they say they need Komatsu's biggest dozer without needing the absolute biggest. The D475A-5 carries an operating weight close to 108 and 4/10 tons, 238,960 pounds, heavier than a fully loaded Airbus A320 at takeoff weight. Komatsu builds this dozer specifically for surface mining overburden removal, where a single pass needs to move as much rock as possible before the machine turns around for the next one. Mine planners run the math on machines this size against fleets of smaller dozers, and at this weight class, one D475A-5 with one operator often clears the overburden that would otherwise need 2 or 3 lighter machines and crews. Komatsu positioned this model directly one rung below its D575A flagship, close enough in size that the two are sometimes mistaken for each other from a distance, but the gap in weight between them is still over 40 tons. The D475A-5 measures almost 12 meters long, roughly the length of 2 large delivery vans end to end. It stands about 4 1/3 meters tall at the cab, tall enough that its silhouette dominates a mine haul road, even next to loaded dump trucks. Only 2 machines on this entire list now outweigh it. Look at the semi-U blade filling the front of the D475A-5's frame. At this size, a single pass can carry a load that would take a wheel loader several trips to match, which is exactly the math mine planners run when they choose one dozer this size over a fleet of smaller machines. The blade's curved wings are reinforced along the cutting edge, specifically because at this tonnage, ordinary wear plate would deform under the load. Komatsu's D475A-5 tops out one step below the biggest bulldozer ever built. Caterpillar's answer sits at that same edge, the D11T, the largest production dozer Caterpillar has ever manufactured, and the standard giant of coal and oil sands mining wherever a site runs a Cat-only fleet. Caterpillar built the first D11 in the mid-1980s, specifically to compete at the size Komatsu's D475 and D575 lines already occupied. The D11T carries an operating weight of 248,500 pounds, 112 and 7/10 tons, about as heavy as 18 African bull elephants loaded onto a single chassis. Its engine is rated in the range of 850 horsepower, built to sustain that pushing force for full shifts in coal seams and oil sands overburden rather than short bursts. Caterpillar's largest dozer has become the standard machine across Alberta's oil sands and Australia's open-cut coal mines, to the point that mine planning software treats one D11 as a standard unit of overburden removal capacity the way other industries treat a shipping container. A single D11T operating continuously can move enough material in a shift to fill several dozen standard dump truck beds, without the truck ever leaving the pit. The D11T stretches over 12 meters, including its rear ripper attachment, close to the length of a mid-sized city bus and a half. It stands roughly 4 1/3 meters tall at the cab, tall enough that a standing adult beside its track looks like a detail rather than a person. Only one machine on this list is now bigger, and it is not built by Caterpillar. The D11T is the biggest bulldozer Caterpillar has ever built, and it is still not the biggest bulldozer in the world. Komatsu introduced the D575A in 1991 specifically to claim that title outright, engineering a dozer so far beyond ordinary mining scale that Komatsu markets it under its own name rather than folding it into the regular D-series lineup, the Superdozer. Fewer than 20 were ever built, because there are only a handful of surface mines on Earth with pits wide enough to justify one. The D575A-3 carries an operating weight of 152,600 kilograms, 152 and 6/10 tons, heavier than a fully loaded Boeing 747 sitting empty on the tarmac. Its engine produces 1,150 horsepower, more than double the D11T's output, needed to move a blade this size through material that would stall anything smaller. In a single pass, the D575A can push up to 96 cubic meters of loose rock and soil, enough to fill roughly 6 standard dump truck beds without the machine backing up once. Komatsu built this dozer for the specific job of opening new mining benches and clearing overburden in Canadian oil sands, and the largest open-pit copper and coal operations, sites where the volume of material to be moved makes anything smaller a bottleneck rather than a solution. The D575A-3 stretches to roughly 13.5 meters long, close to the length of 3 delivery vans parked end to end. It stands nearly 5 meters tall at the cab roof, tall enough that the operator's eye level sits above a 2-story building. Every other machine on this list, all 7 of them, would fit into the shadow this dozer casts at midday. Focus on the blade mounted across the front of the D575A-3. Komatsu calls the design the solid dozing system. Tall vertical sidewalls in place of the usual curved wings, built to trap loose material that would otherwise spill free of a smaller blade's edges. That single blade holds a load equivalent to 6 standard dump truck beds, and it does it in one pass across ground. Nothing else on this list is built to touch.